Lover's Tale, which is in the Tales of Mos Eisley Cantina, and Taster's Choice, which is in Tales from Jabba's Palace. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Not to mention the story I wrote for the Star Wars Adventure Journal, which is my Gamorrean murder mystery love story, which was one of my absolute favorites, and it kills me that it was done work for hire, which means I can't put it on my website, and apparently you can't find it on Star Wars websites because it was in the old canon, and then they changed the canon, and now you can't find it.
Yeah, I guarantee someone here will be able to locate it for you.
I have.
Yes. So to get into your life and everything about you, what got you started into writing?
I started storyboarding stories about my toys before I learned the alphabet.
Oh, wow.
I have always done this. I have never not done this. My sister was afraid of the dark, had a number of issues. She was afraid of the dark, and so we got into storytelling after the lights were out at night. And it was interactive, as she had some characters and I had some characters. And that taught me how to keep a series going. And that taught me how to keep dialogue going. And that taught us both how to do funny voices. And this is something I've always done. I wrote fanfic style things, which back in 1961, nobody had heard of that, so I got horribly teased and bullied at school about writing fanfic about Edgar Rice Burroughs' Mars series.
Oh, wow.
And that was the last time I told anybody that I wrote anything until I got published.
Oh, wow. That's a bit of a traumatic experience then. But
It was very
dramatic.
No, actually, in high school, I had two friends. When Star Trek came out, we started writing Star Trek stories for each other, but of course, because there was no internet in 1966, we didn't know anybody else did this. And so we would write Star Trek stories for each other. And again, that taught me how to keep characters going, to keep a story going. And so this is just something I have always done.
Amazing.
A friend of mine, close friend of mine, Mark Zickrey, who is now he's involved with a show called Space Command that they're trying to get off the ground. He told me that there's basically two kinds of writers. He said the first kind of writer is the writer for whom writing is the safe place. Is you go into your mind, you go into your heart, you go into the darkness, you see what's there and you feel safe and it's wonderful. And he said that kind of writer usually starts as children. He said the other kind of writer is the kind of writer who you go into your mind and you go into your heart and you go in the darkness and it scares the crap out of you. But because you're a writer, you have to write. And it was his theory that this is one reason why many writers end up with substance abuse problems. So this type of writer usually starts later.
Okay.
Fortunately, I was type A. I was the first type.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my late husband was the second type.
Oh, dear.
That did not end well.
Oh, dear.
Brilliant writer, but that did not end well. So I've always done it. If you're a writer, you write. If you're a storyteller, you have to tell these stories.
Exactly. I've always compared myself to a narrator. You're just narrating some of the
Yes,
experience. What genre do you enjoy writing the most?
That's a little hard to tell.
Yeah.
Right now, I write historical murder mysteries, historical whodunits. I enjoy that tremendously.
And you write some Sherlock Holmes stories. Which is
I
really
wrote 4 Sherlock Holmes stories.
Yeah.
The minute, because people would be able to license anthologies from the Doyle estate. And so I wrote 4 Sherlock Holmes stories. And again, they would, with the anthology, there was one fellow who did an anthology of Sherlock Holmes within the H.P. Lovecraft Cthulhu mythos. So I did one of those. And one of them, they said, actually 2 of them, they said, they wanted Sherlock Holmes crossover with a fantasy character. And so I did one with Sherlock Holmes' Adventures with Peter Pan. And because,
That's really fun.
well, I figured that as a child, Holmes was one of the Lost Boys,
Yes.
and that he came back. And then the other one was Adventure with the Wizard Oz, whose actual name was Oscar Diggs. In that period of time after he left Oz and before he went back.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've always loved writing Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah. I love Sherlock.
I enjoy writing fantasy. For a long time, I did not write fantasy because sort of the bottom fell out of that market, and I enjoy doing mystery series. I enjoy doing historical mystery series. And then but because I had, nobody was buying the series the fantasy series that I started in the 80s and 90s. Nobody would pick up another book from those. Because who's going to buy a sequel to a busted series?
Yeah.
But I knew they still had fans. So as soon as Amazon started publishing, I started writing the further adventures of characters from these old series. And because I got a whole bunch of stuff has happened in the past 2 years, and I haven't written one of those stories in 2 years.
Okay.
I'm hoping to go back to them now that I am retired from teaching.
Oh, well, congrats on being retired.
It's really different than it was when I started. But I also started writing another full-on fantasy novel. And that got picked up by Open Road Publications as they're publishing it in print and they're also publishing it digitally. And apparently it's doing quite well. So it's nice to be back in fantasy.
That's excellent.
But it's hard to say what genres I most enjoy writing in.
Mm. Do you find a lot of your work, do you put any autobiographical elements into it?
Not really.
Okay.
Other than the fact that, like the heroine of the first fantasy series I wrote, that she was a grad student in history.
Okay.
One of the characters in the heroine of one of these further adventure series, she's a martial artist. And in fact, years before I started training in Aikido, I said that the martial arts she practiced is Aikido.
Okay.
And then, many years later, I started training in Aikido.
Yeah. So why did you start doing that? Was it for a writing purpose or
no.
just curiosity?
Well, given my own inclinations, I would be a complete slug. But I knew from the time I was like 4 years old that I wanted to write. And everybody kept saying, write what you know. And I knew that nobody was going to be interested in the adventures of a fat girl in suburban Southern California in the 1950s. So I thought, okay, you need to know what you write.
Yeah.
And I wanted to write action adventure. And so I deliberately went out and learned how to ride a horse and learned how to shoot a gun. And when I was 15, I trained for a while in sword, but all they taught was European sword.
Yeah.
And that's why I took up karate and training in karate. I learned a whole bunch of things that had to do with life. Like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You know, things that happen when you're training in the dojo.
Yeah.
Well, and when you're 24 years old. And, you know, when I was able to, I took up samurai sword,
Amazing.
which I just made black belt in, which is not bad for 71.
No, that's a phenomenal achievement. I think everyone should just give a round of applause for that.
And what was the question?
How much do you put into yourself?
Not much autobiographical. In a sense, that is autobiographical because, you know, the thing that I learned in karate was how to write a fight scene.
Yeah, exactly.
And the things that, you know, I learned in Aikido is, you know, it's the same thing. Training really helps. Having my friends take me out into the desert and shoot guns, I learned the difference between shooting modern smokeless powder and shooting black powder.
Okay.
The kick is completely different.
Okay.
I learned how to load one of those suckers. In a sense, that's autobiographical. I also do historical costuming for the same reason.
Okay.
Is, you know, how do you use a bathroom when you're wearing a corset and a bustle?
Yeah.
It can be done, but it is not dignified.
Yes, that is very true.
So, and then autobiographical, I have a lot of friends and a lot of people that I know, and being in a karate association in the 1970s, I learned an awful lot about the dirty politics of interorganizational rivalries. You know, because any organization, any big organization you're in, you're going to have people stabbing each other in the back and gossiping and all that.
It's human nature.
Yeah, exactly. I needed to learn about human nature. I don't know whether that would be called autobiographical or not. On the other hand, the Star Wars story Taster's Choice, which is about, it's the only person who was not actually in the film. It's Jabba the Hutt's personal chef. And I based him on my late husband.
Oh, wow.
You know, in the story, his name is Porcellus. And my late husband's nickname was Piglet. And so Porcellus is Latin for piglet.
Yeah. I was wondering where that came from.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's about as autobiographical as it gets.
Yeah. Very cool. What was the first story you published? And how did you get there?
First story I published was a trilogy, The Time of the Dark, and I wrote it as a single volume, and I sent it to, I went to the library, because this was, of course, before the internet. I went to the library and got a list of publishers who publish science fiction. And the first one, the one that looked best, was Del Rey Books. And I packed it up and I sent it to the editor of Del Rey Books. And 2 weeks later, I got back a letter saying, "We'll take it, can you make it into a trilogy?" And I went, "Oh shit, I don't have an agent." And so I hastily found an agent And she was my agent for 35 years
Oh, wow.
until she passed away of old age. And she was not that much older than I am. So it was, I guess trilogies were really popular in 1981.
Yeah. Did you have anyone from your high school come back to you and say, oh wow, you're still writing and now you're published?
No, actually, although one of the girl who really bullied me in high school, she later, circumstances of her life changed, and she got in touch with me on Facebook and apologized.
Oh, well that's nice.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah,
closure.
it was very sweet. Yeah, I had some closure, and then I met her at the 50th class reunion, for God's sake. And we had a nice talk, and she told me about what her life was like when we were in high school together. And I went, no wonder you were pissed off at everything and unhappy.
Yeah.
You learn things.
Indeed, yeah. So you were also the president of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. How did that come about?
It came about because at a Worldcon, the previous president of the science fiction of SIPWA, Joe Haldeman, at a party at a Worldcon, he got down on his knees and begged me to replace him as president. And because I liked Joe, I said I would. And so I was president for 2 years, president of SIPWA for 2 years. And it was not a pleasant experience. There were certain members of SIPWA who felt free to call me up on the phone and scream at me over things which turned out to be fairly trivial. But it was good experience.
Just one of those more experiences to...
Just one of those damn learning experiences. And the thing I learned is, well, let's not do that again.
I learn the hard way sometimes. So what's something that you do for your writing process?
Do for my writing process?
Yeah.
That's kind of like asking, what do you do to get yourself up for making love on your honeymoon?
Yeah.
Writing is the heart and core of my life. I love to write. I love to sit down at the computer, and whether I'm coming up with a story or whether I'm editing to get the dialogue right, or whether I'm going, even sitting down and timelining, because you gotta sit down and at some point you've gotta sit down and timeline. Okay, if this happened on Monday, what else was happening on Monday that's gonna feed into it? The things that I do to help my writing process is I take a walk every day. Later on in the afternoon, I will do some kind of physical activity. I train in Aikido 3 times a week, or actually Aikido twice a week and sword twice a week.
Do you do that in your Jedi robes?
No. I make the time to be with my friends. I divorced a husband.
That frees up.
Freed up a lot of energy.
Yeah.
They talk about picturing who's actually doing this writing. And who's actually doing this writing is this little 5-year-old girl sitting hidden in a closet with a typewriter. And periodically I'll buy her presents. You know. I read because a lot of my stuff is historical. I do historical murder mysteries. A lot of my reading is research, it's nonfiction. I don't get involved in social media. I try to limit my exposure to news. You know, I'll check headlines a couple times a day, and I try to keep my distance from that. I meditate twice a day because many writers that I have talked to who have taken antidepressants, who had to go onto antidepressants, it really screwed up their writing.
Yeah, I'll imagine.
So I know that for me, antidepressants are not an option. So I meditate twice a day. It really cuts down on the anxiety attacks.
I can imagine, yeah.
You know, I have had anxiety attacks and anxiety disorder, and meditation really helps.
Okay. It's good you found a group place to do.
Yeah.
Okay. So actually, since you were talking about some of your reading, what are some of the authors you like to read?
The authors that have most heavily influenced me back to when I was a child, you know, I read all of the Oz books, read all of Burroughs's Mars books, read The Lord of the Rings many, many, many times.
As I'm sure all of us have.
The reading a lot of murder mysteries, the older ones, Dorothy Sayers, Josephine Tay, Emma Lathan.
Did you ever read Horatio Hornblower?
I attempted to.
Okay.
And you know, there's frequently, I'll try reading something and I know it's good, and it just doesn't happen. And I have found that when I'm writing, when I'm intensely involved in writing, it's very difficult for me to read fiction. I have not read fantasy fiction in many years, simply because I don't have the energy.
Yeah. Okay. So how did you get your start in Star Wars?
First time I was sitting in that movie theater and saw that starship go by over my head. And the weird thing is, I first saw that film because I was and still am a terrible Alec Guinness fan. And seeing it's like the first time you see Star Trek. It's like, it's walking into a new world. And Star Wars was the same way. And then when they started doing the novels, I was friends with Kevin Anderson.
Okay.
And Kevin and I met at conventions, and Kevin asked me, did I want to do a story for the Tales from Star Wars Cantina. I thought this was a wonderful idea. So, that was when I had already started writing. I'd already started being published. So the next time I was in New York, I visited Kevin's editor, Beth Meacham, Betsy Mitchell. And she said, I didn't know you liked Star Wars. I said, oh yeah. And she said, would you like to do some novels for us? And I said, sure. Yeah, basically.
Wow.
So that's how I got Children of the Jedi and Planet of Twilight, which the original title of Planet of Twilight, or the original working title of Planet of Twilight, was Planet of the Disgusting Bugs.
That's funny.
But it was basically because I knew editors, and they knew that I could be relied on to turn in a publishable manuscript, that they didn't have to teach me how to write. And that first little group of Star Wars novels, a lot of that was they were looking for people who loved Star Wars and who had other writing credits.
Okay.
So they didn't, because they needed to get these done quickly, and they didn't want to have to teach anybody how to write.
Yeah.
Or at least that was my impression.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk a bit about Night Lily. So, what an interesting short story.
Night Lily?
Yes. One of my jobs for Legends Con was to make videos and to kind of put things together. And they had a date of like, this is being released this day, so let's do one on Night Lily. I'm like, have you read the story? Like, do you want me to do a little video on this? Yeah, it's quite the story.
And I did it so long ago, and I remember virtually nothing about it except that it ends with one of the lovers devouring the other one.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird like justice situation going on, because like he wanted to like love her and leave her, and then she's like, well, we're getting married and now I need you.
Yes, exactly.
So-
Exactly. And the moral of that story is, don't pick up members of other species in interstellar cantinas.
Yeah. So what's your favorite alien that you've ever written about? Because you write a lot of alien species.
My favorite alien that I've ever written about? This is going to sound a little strange. Dragons.
Dragons, I love dragons.
When I write about dragons, I assume that they are an alien species, that they do not fly, that they fly by levitation and the wings are only to steer them. And I've written a number of stories about dragons, always with the unspoken subtext that they are an alien interstellar species.
Okay.
In Star Wars, I think my favorite aliens were the Gamorreans,
Yeah.
were the big guards, because they're trying really hard. I loved the fact that, and I think I got this from the West End Games stuff that they sent me, that on the planet Gamor, it's the females who own all the property.
Okay.
And I figured that's because the males are always fighting amongst each other.
Yeah.
And there's like, the birth rate is, for every female, there's 10 or 20 males. You know, there's just fewer females born.
Okay.
And of course the males are too stupid to manage property anyway. So the goal is to hook up with a female who will support you. And having met, the Gamorreans are not the only ones that have this problem.
Yes. I can agree with that.
And of course, as one of the characters in, it's in Murder in Slush Time, where Callista goes to visit a young scholar from one of the human planets, and he's been stranded on Gamor for many years, and he makes his living by writing love poetry, because the males, they really want to court the females, but they know they're no good at love poetry.
Yeah.
So they hire this guy to write love poems.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of neat. In the end, he ends up being the husband of Natasi Dada.
Yeah.
And has a kid with them. So I thought that was a funny little tie-in that you've done that there. So where did Callista come from? Because that's the one we want to talk about, is how she started and why she was a ship and why Luke fell in love with her.
Well, When I was asked to do that first Star Wars novel, the editor said, we want you to write the woman who will be the great love of Luke's life.
Mhm.
And the whole theme of Children of the Jedi is that there are some things that you can't use the Force. You know, there's a lot in Star Wars about, you know, using the Force, but there's some things that the Force, you can't use the Force. People die.
Yeah.
People leave you. Even if you bring somebody back from the dead, they're not the same. And that Callista has been living within the computers of this ghost ship for many, many years. And the stories of her and I forget what the other woman's name is.
Cremingma?
Yeah. They eventually merge when Cray understands that she can't bring her beloved back, that she needs to go across to him. And then Callista can get her body.
Yeah.
And I had written it this way, and at the last minute, the editor gets in touch with me and said, oh, we've decided to take the series in another direction. An author more prestigious than yourself has said that he wants his female character to be the great love of Luke's life. I was really pissed off at that.
I can imagine.
And yet, then later, they changed the entire canon, so it didn't matter.
Yeah.
But I loved writing Callista.
Yeah.
And in later stories, she had this power and then she lost it. And so what does that do to her? And I enjoyed working on that.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting when you have the moment when she goes into Crave's body and becomes Callista, that Luke says, I love you, and who also is there, but Mara Jade is there as well in the scene. So it's just kind of like, that's the character Luke eventually ends up with, and, you know, it's...
Yeah, and I don't know whether the changeover in the direction affected my perception of Mara Jade as a character.
Okay.
I never warmed to her as a character, and I don't know whether this was just me being jealous and pissy.
Maybe.
But as with many things, stuff that you just get really all red and sweaty over, then as they say, the years will show you what the days could not.
Yeah. It's always good to let things go sometimes. How did it feel, though, having Luke fall in love, though, for the first time?
I really like Luke as a character.
Yeah.
He has an engineering mind. He has the mind of a guy who fixes cars for a living. And he's very, at least in those first 3 films, which was what I was going on, because that was all that was out at that time. He's very idealistic. And he's looking for someone who is, he's looking for a partner. He's looking for someone who can be his partner. And that was how I pictured Callista, as someone who has been down the same road that he has.
Well, it's definitely a theme in your in writing, having love as one of them, even if it's, I'm going to eat you now versus.
Yes. Yes, including poor Celis's crush on Princess Leia.
Yeah.
That he loves her so much that he will help the man that she loves.
Exactly. Oh, it's very touching. So how do you feel about Callista's fate? You know how she kind of ends up.
She ends up getting killed.
Yeah, she gets absorbed into this other woman, and but Luke does free her in the end and gives her peace.
Essentially, I had to step back from the character because so that I would not feel resentful. And I did feel resentful, and I stepped back from that whole issue so that it would not affect my judgment. It would not affect my relationships with other people involved in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah.
So I think I read that book, but I only read it once, and it was a long time ago.
Yeah. What would you have done differently with her fate, like her story?
I can't even answer that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, because
you never explored it.
No, I've never explored it. Well, with Murder in Slush Time, of course, when she has been separated from Luke, and she goes on with her life.
Yeah.
But how the relationship with her and Luke would have played out, I did not go there because I could not. And I just had to step back from it.
Yeah. If you could write any story in Star Wars, what would you write?
I would write and I proposed this to them, I would write with the original cast, in the original configuration. I would write an Agatha Christie style, what they used to call a country house murder mystery, where you're in a limited space, all the characters are accounted for, nobody's coming in, nobody's coming out, and there's been a murder, and we're gonna find the murder. Because for me, the Star Wars novels were like the old British comedy of manners, where I used them to investigate things like, there was an awful lot of an element like the lower decks in the Star Trek series. So what do they serve in the cafeterias on the Death Star? What is all this stuff going on in the background? What is it like to live in this world? Who are the street vendors in Mos Eisley?
Yeah.
Who is Jabba the Hutt's personal chef? He's got to have one.
Yeah.
And how does he feel about his job?
How long does he last? Yeah.
Exactly. I loved the fact that my story ended with him and the Rancor Keeper looting the treasury, running off to set up their own business.
Yeah.
So I would do it almost as a comedy of manners, as let's investigate how do the nobility relate to their servants.
Very upstairs.
It's very upstairs, downstairs. What do the bodyguards think about the up and ups?
Okay.
That's what interests me about any series.
Well, hopefully, maybe we can get you another book to be done.
I would love it.
Yeah.
I would love it, but you got to be careful with these things because
Yes.
they'll sue your backside off.
Yes, that's very true. They have the money, so.
Yes. Yes.
Well, great. I'm really happy that you were able to join us today.
Oh, well, thank
Really
you.
wonderful.
Thank you. I am delighted to be here. Thank you all for coming here. And
Yeah, thank you.
thank you. This was great fun.